Hello and welcome back to Maker Chat Live. I'm your host, Adam Krutinger, and today we're going to be talking about self-publishing with author Jay Miletsky. Don't miss out. And how you doing, Jay?
I'm good, Adam. How you doing?
Good. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I'm so excited to talk to you because not only are you an author, but also you're a speaker, a storyteller, and you have your own children's book press called New Page Press. And I want to get into a lot of those things, but before we get too deep into it, I just wanted to kind of ask is how you got started in writing and being an author.
Well, actually, I think people who are watching this probably know me from my children's books, but I actually started writing right out of college. I graduated from Brandeis University in 1994, and back then I started a marketing agency out of my bedroom. And when I started learning how to do marketing and how to do print work and things like that, I learned pretty quickly that the industry was changing, and it was going from drafting tables to using computers. And a new software was out called Photoshop, and no one had really heard of it. And it was not an easy thing to use at the time. So I taught myself how to use Photoshop. And as it happened, I turned out to be one of the few people in New York, New Jersey, who ended up passing the Adobe Certified Photoshop tests. And I ended up, long story short, I ended up getting a phone call from Pearson Education, which is a large traditional publisher, asking me if I was interested in writing a book on how to use Photoshop. So I actually was one of the earlier authors to write a how-to book on that program.
Oh, really?
So back in '95 or so.
So that wasn't a book for kids, though. That was a book for training adults how to use this program.
Yeah, and it was a general consumer book. You'd find it in most Barnes and Nobles and back then Borders and wherever else. And that turned into one or two more books on graphic design and Photoshop and things like that. And eventually, when my acquisitions editor moved from Pearson to Cengage Learning, they asked me if I would be interested in writing another one. And I said, not really, but I could write some books on advertising and marketing. So I wrote, overall, I wrote 12 books. 2 of them were college textbooks. The rest of them were on marketing, advertising, entrepreneurship. And eventually I ended up just, they were very, very boring to write. I assume they're probably more boring to read. I didn't really enjoy much of that at all. And at some point I kind of ran out of material, and I just didn't want to write those books anymore. Every book was 300-400 pages. You had to write them very quickly, otherwise they'd be outdated very, very soon. So I stopped writing for a while, and then after I had my daughter 8 years ago, I would read to her almost every night. And the more I read to her, the more I was kind of getting back into the idea of writing and stories and thinking of different things. And I started jotting down some ideas. And then a few years ago, I finally decided, let me give this a shot. And that's basically where we are now.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh, that's really amazing too. Especially because I'm familiar with your books. Actually, I have a couple here, and I just reread them too as prep. And man, they really are really well put together in so many ways. Now, Ricky the Rock That Couldn't Roll, it seems like kind of one of your main books. Was this one of the first ones?
That was my first children's book. Wow. And that one was. I'm not sure if you're aware, but my daughter is 8 years old now. Her name is Bria. And you probably noticed the Ladybug character is named after my daughter. Okay. But actually, the story itself is really about my daughter in a lot of ways. Ricky is a rock that he's surrounded by other rocks that are all round, and so they can roll around the hill and have fun that way. And Ricky, unfortunately, is flat on one side, so he can't roll around with the others. And it's a book that's supposed to promote friendship and perseverance, and also just be a fun plot-driven story with quirky characters and all things like that. And I think kids really enjoy that aspect of it. But really, the book is a metaphor. It's supposed to be almost a letter to parents of kids like myself. My daughter has cerebral palsy, so even though she's 8, she can't walk yet. And just like Ricky can't roll because he's flat on one side, my daughter, because she has CP, she can't walk or run or do things that other people do. And the way Ricky has all of his rock friends who try to help him to learn how to roll, my daughter has friends and family, teachers, aides, therapists, nurses, doctors, whatever else, all trying or working 24 hours a day to figure out ways for her to be more mobile. And, knowing other parents like myself who, feel like they've given up in a lot of ways, or they feel like, kind of desperate and at the end of the rope, I've always taken a much more positive approach to my daughter's progression and development. And I've always kind of thought, look, we're just not going to give up and we're going to make progress. So I wanted this book to be more of a letter to those parents. But at the same time, I've had enough experience in business to know that, if I put a child in a wheelchair on the cover, the fact is no one's going to buy that book. The parents of developmentally typical kids won't buy that book because they find that's scary. Whether it's right or wrong, they do. They find it scary. Parents of kids like my daughter probably won't buy that book because they live that every day. They don't want more material around with wheelchairs. So in order to make it give it some mass appeal, I kind of buried that whole messaging underneath everything else and made it much more subtle. Most people never realize that it's a book, for about a kid with a disability.
Yeah, that's amazing. And again, I would not have known that upon reading it the first time. I did know that because I'm more familiar with your work, so I knew some of the backstory from that. But that's such an important thing because my background is mainly now is a puppeteer, but I also am working on some manuscripts for children's books as well. But one thing I know to me is my overall philosophy is you have to grab people's attention, and the best way to get their attention is through entertainment. So unfortunately, it almost sounds opposite. Your message is kind of secondary to the entertainment so that you can get their attention. Because if kids don't enjoy reading it, the message almost doesn't matter then.
Well, exactly. I kind of call it the, it's a hiding the peas in the mashed potatoes sort of a method of writing. You want your kids to eat something that's healthy for them, but they don't want to eat it, so you hide it in something that tastes better. It's the same thing here. If kids aren't going to read, kids aren't going to read a book that's called Barry the Bully Who Learns to Be Kind. That's not a fun book. They're not going to keep pulling that off the shelf. So there's no point in sending a message if it's going to be that direct. The book has to be fun first. I've had some people, by and large, the reviews that I've gotten and feedback that I've gotten on this book have been insanely high, insanely positive. It's got a very, very high rating on Amazon, has very few negative ratings, but the one or two negative ratings that I've gotten, have been that, one person said that, the rocks really shouldn't be trying to get Ricky to roll. They should all be, maybe they should sit with him and just have a moss growing contest. And my thinking to that is, okay, but in the end, that's not really what reality is. The world doesn't stop for my daughter, nor would I expect it to. But B, this is still a story. Who wants to read a story about a moss growing contest? It's not fun. The story has to still be fun to read.
Yeah. Another thing I would say too, because a lot of times with things that I write, whether it's a puppet script or a story that I'm writing, people give those kinds of ideas. I said, that's a good idea, but that's another story. Right. Or maybe it could be like another book or the next book or something in a series. And actually, speaking of it being a series, I know you have many different. This is a series. You have your Tess, the tin that wanted to rock. You have the Grumpy Rocks here, and I think a couple others as well. So you kind of made a whole little series out of this.
Well, I'm not a huge fan of going into something and thinking this is going to be a collection right off the bat. I think everybody, and a lot of people do that. A lot of people will, before they even write the first word, they say, I've got an idea for a book series or a book collection. And, for me, to me, those people are people who have read Harry Potter and they think they're going to be the next J.K. Rowling, and perhaps they will. But I don't think that's the right way to go into it. I think the right way to go into it is to write a book and to see some success with that. And once you see some success with that, then you go on to say, okay, hey, you know what? People seem to like these characters. They like this way of storytelling. What else can I build from this? But I think if you bite off too much, more than you can chew, and you kind of put the cart before the horse, you're not going to get very far. So, Ricky ended up being insanely popular. We've sold 60, 70,000 units at this point, and it's still going very strong. And at some point you realize, I'm getting so many people who like this book and so many teachers who have adopted it. What else can I do with these same characters? And so I introduced Tess, a tinfoil ball who rolls her way onto the hill, and she feels that because she's a tinfoil ball, she's not as strong or as solid or as fast at rolling as the rock. She doesn't really fit in, and so she also wants to be a rock, but she can't be. And then at the end of the day, it turns out that she saves the day because she can do things that they can't, such as shine in the moonlight, which ends up helping to save the day for them. So it's about self. Believing in yourself and having self-confidence. And then the other one, the Three Grumpy Rocks, the name of that has changed to Do Pebbles Eat Chili. And that's actually a book of poetry, all based on the rock characters, which, to be honest with you, that's coming out later this year. And I didn't really have a lot of hope for that one because books of poetry don't tend to sell very well. But I'm getting some really good feedback from that so far and a lot of pre-orders for that one. So I'm excited.
That's really interesting. Wow, that's so cool that you're doing pre-orders too, which is something I want to get into in a couple of minutes too, about the more of the sales end of it and whatnot. But before we do that, I do want to talk briefly about your book, The Masterpiece, which I know is also kind of becoming a series as well. And actually, is that the name of the series here? One Big Canvas Book?
One Big Canvas. Yeah.
One Big Canvas. Oh, of course. That's great. And again, this is especially close to my heart because not only as someone who loves characters, someone who likes writing, but also as an art teacher. During the day, I'm an elementary school art teacher, so this resonates with me in many different ways, and especially with your message in this, which does the same thing as your other book, which doesn't beat you over the head with the message, which can sometimes take away from the story and people's desire to read and share the story.
I actually didn't write that book on I wrote that book myself, but I didn't really have the idea for it. It's a book about the idea was to help elementary school teachers between kindergarten and third grade teach their developmentally typical kids about autism, and what autism is like, how to recognize some of the traits and how to deal with it when you do see it. Because a lot of these kids have classmates who may be autistic, and a lot of these kids don't really know what to do with that. So there's a school called the Reed Academy. It's in Oakland, New Jersey. And they ended up reading Ricky the Rock, and they called me and they said, listen, would you be interested in, and the whole thing is very, it's a very small world. I don't even think they realized that I actually grew up in Oakland, New Jersey. So it just ended up being a small world. They asked me if I'd be interested in writing a book to help them teach developmentally typical kids what autism is. And I said, look, I'd be interested in doing that, but I just want to let you know in advance, I'm not going to write a book that uses the word autism. It's not going to use the word spectrum. It's not going to do anything like that at all. It will be about autism without ever saying it, which means that people can read it and they might not even know that's what the book is about, and that has to be okay. And they were great. They were great to work with. They allowed me to pick their brains. They taught me a lot about autism. I got to meet a lot of the kids. I've walked around that school any number of times now. I've gotten to interact with the kids. And when I started off writing that book, I really thought the book was going to be about inclusion, and that was kind of where my head was. And I spoke to, I guess, 5 or 6 different parents of kids with autism who were kind of on the side of the spectrum that was a little more advanced, where they were able to kind of do a little more, play a role in their in a more a typical high school, and the parents really weren't looking for inclusion. What I found from them was that, they said, look, I said, inclusion is fine as a concept. They said, but the truth is that if the kids in my son's school are going to a basketball game and they call my son to go with them, that would be weird to me. I don't think that would actually happen. If they're all going to a party, I don't expect them to call my son to go with them. I'm not really looking for that. And if they did, I'd be suspicious that something else is up. What I'm looking for is acceptance, understanding, and kindness. Not so much inclusion. So that's kind of that really, and they all seem to say the same thing. And it was a very kind of realistic, eye-opening way of looking at it. So the book ended up not being so much about inclusion as much as it was about recognizing some of the traits and behaviors that you might see in kids who have autism, how to react to them, and how to kind of deal with them in a way that, yes, includes them without excluding them, and also kind of makes everyone feel okay with the situation. And in the end, the idea is that it takes a community to create a masterpiece.
Wow. Holy cow. Yeah, that's really great. And again, but you've made written other books to go along with that too. I have a cover here, The Molding of Clay.
That's the one. Yep. So that one actually is, yep, I'm just going to hold it up. This one is coming out, I think, in October.
Oh, okay. It's not out yet. That's right.
So we're excited about this one.
Wow. Do you think you'll have plans to expand that series even more than that? Potentially?
Yeah. So actually, the Molding of Clay is the second book. We are definitely going to be doing a third book, but because the masterpiece seems to have taken on a little bit of a life of its own. Even though that's my 5th title overall, that's my first title that's actually been adopted by Target. So most of the Target brick and mortar stores probably by now have there you go. Probably by now have a copies of the masterpiece on their shelves, because that's really been kind of driving a lot of the sales, not so much Amazon. We've started to get other brick and mortar stores very interested in holding on to that book. And what we started to say is, maybe after the Molding of Clay, we've kind of exhausted we've kind of done what we need to do in terms of making the stories really kind of focus in on autism. We don't want to keep repeating the same story over and over again. So we're probably going to expand that series, but not touch on the autistic side of it. We're just going to have the characters be fun, happy characters and teach different lessons and different morals about friendship and inclusion and working together and teamwork, whatever else. But maybe move away from the autism part, the same way that my rock books moved away from the CP aspect, and especially these aspects, they moved on to other things. Yeah. So there's no reason to beat anyone over the head with the same message over and over again.
Oh, of course.
The characters clearly can have a life of their own.
Yeah, you want to expand not just the story, but also the message as well, which is great, because then they all support each other. But another thing I want to get into is your actual writing process. Is there how do you start to generate ideas? It sounds like so far you kind of are filling a need that you saw from reading stories to your daughter. But for as far as actually when you sit down at your table, or actually wherever you sit to get down and start writing, what's your process like?
Well, I'll give you the actual correct answer. This is and I'll be hopeful that a lot of kids aren't watching this, because when I go to schools, I always get that question, and I kind of fib a little bit. I tell the kids that when I write, I sit in a very quiet room and I make sure all the TVs are off and the music is off, because that's obviously the way teachers and parents would prefer the kids were doing their homework. So I tell them that's the way I do my writing. The way I actually do my writing is not a way that I recommend to anybody. I like to write while I'm driving. I have my phone on my dashboard, and I will push the microphone button in a notes program, and I will just start to spew out different lyrics as they come to me. Once I get an idea in my head for what I want a story to be about, I start to piece it together, and I don't necessarily write it in a linear way. Sometimes I'll write a middle piece, then I'll write the ending, then I'll go back to the beginning. Meanwhile, I am probably endangering everyone within an 80-meter radius of me, because I'm all over the place while I'm driving. But so it's not a great way of writing, but it tends to be the way that I do most of my work.
Yeah, there's something that I really love about that, because I have a similar process as well. Whereas I like to, it's hard to sometimes sit down and just start writing, because you feel a lot of pressure, that what you write is going to be good. And even after you write down a sentence, you start revising as you're still writing, right? So is there something about just being able to sit back and tell a story? And even myself, I find I can come up with a decent story just through improv. So maybe I'll tell a story to my nephew or something like that, and I'll record myself doing it. And then I take that, type it out, and then it's just time to start editing. And you can really, by just kind of improving it through live with somebody, or even, to your phone, like you're saying, you can kind of explore places that you wouldn't normally have explored. And again, you don't have this desire to immediately start editing something that you just wrote a couple minutes ago. So that's amazing. So from that point, then you take your voice memos, and then I imagine you do a type to text or talk to text thing, and then you start editing it together.
Correct. So I'll like I said, I don't really do it in a linear way. I'll use a speech to text sort of thing, and I'll just kind of go through some different lines and some rhymes. I mean, all my books are lyrically written. I will sometimes, if I only know the end words of some lines, I'll just use those words, and I'll kind of fit in some words before them to make the lines work. And then at some point when I get home, I'll take that notes program, I sync it up to my laptop, I put it into a Word program, and I'll start to kind of piece it all together, and I'll fill in the missing parts. Then I typically will let my wife read it, and she'll let me know which parts seem to be lacking a little bit, which parts and where I'm missing some information, and then I just fill in the gaps.
Gotcha. Another thing I notice, which is I've noticed in these books, and I'm assuming maybe all of your books, that you write in rhyme. Do you mind telling us a little bit about why you chose to do that, and if you will continue to do that?
The book. When I would read to my daughter, I'd say half the books were written in rhyme and half the books were written in prose. And I just tend to like the books that were written in rhyme better when they were written well. And I was always kind of surprised by how many books I would buy that were written in rhyme and they really weren't done well. The meter was off, the rhyming was off, I would be looking at these books like the Pout Pout Fish, for example, which somehow is wildly popular, even though the meter is off in at least a dozen places. There's words in there that clearly don't rhyme. And I started thinking if this is the bar, I could definitely get beyond this. So I started to play around with some rhymes, and I originally started to speak to some people, and people would tell me, don't write a book that rhymes. And when I asked why, they said that nobody wants to publish that because most people can't write in rhyme. And when someone throws a challenge out like that, then my first instinct is I want to meet that challenge. So I started to just write, and I realized that I kind of had a little bit of a knack for finding the meter and finding the rhythm and rhyming the right way. I think a lot of people who write in rhyme try to force fit words that don't necessarily rhyme, or they have words that rhyme and they force fit the rest of the words or the rest of the lyrics just to meet those rhymes, and they forget that the whole purpose of writing in rhyme is to create some fun in the book, to create some character to it. And the whole thing is like a Rubik's Cube. When you think about it, these children's books are maybe 500 words, maybe 600 words. That's not a lot of words, really, to introduce characters, introduce a setting, establish what the plot is, make your character suffer a little bit so that people care about him, create that emotional connection, and create some sort of a positive resolution at the end in only 500 words. And now you take all that and you add on the even more complicated layer of making all this have to rhyme. And that's really difficult. And I love puzzles. So to me, working in rhyme is just like trying to solve a really large, intricate puzzle. And I enjoy that part of it.
Yeah, no, that's really cool because I've dabbled in some rhyming writing of books as well, and there's something about it I really do like, but I do also really like the freedom of writing not in rhyme. But I definitely hear what you're saying too about some of those books that you read and you wonder, how did this get published?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, there's some, especially like people rhyming a word with but the next word's in plural and it doesn't rhyme anymore. That is, I can't believe how common that is. And
it's very common.
Yeah, and again, it throws off the rhythm as well, not even just the rhyme alone. So that's so. Do you plan to write any books at all in just without rhyme, or you think you're probably going to stick with this for now?
I think it's I think with children's picture books, I think I'm always going to write in rhyme. I don't see myself really writing any books in prose. However, I have been starting to write some notes. One of the other books that I've got coming out later this year has been, I don't know if you can see it behind me, but Patrick Picklebottom and the Penny Book, which is this one. And it's one of the ones I'm probably the most excited about. The artwork is beautiful. I love the story of it. I love the characters. I like the reason why I wrote it and the message behind the story. There you go. There's some of the characters. Those are great. And I already have 2 more books in production with those same characters. And I've started to think these could be characters that could stick with kids later on. So, if kids are reading this, let's say kindergarten to 3rd grade, there's no reason why they can't read those same characters 4th grade to 6th grade, even after they move beyond picture books. So I've started to write some notes for some young adult books or some tween books, I guess. That would be a chapter book featuring the same characters. And those wouldn't rhyme.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Now, one thing I really want to get into as well is how you're self-publishing. And before we get into that, I was just curious. Did you try traditional publishing at first, or because of your background in marketing, you decided to just go for it?
Well, I think I was a little spoiled because, originally when I first wrote my books on marketing and branding and earlier on Photoshop, I didn't have to go through the same kind of routine that most people have to go through, getting an agent and the agent getting a publisher. The publisher came to me. So I was very, very spoiled in terms of working with a publisher. And by the time I started thinking about writing the children's book, I thought it should be just that easy. I thought, once I decide that I want to write a children's book, publishers should come knocking, and nobody did. And even though I had a platform, my Pucker Mob website, which had 10 million plus people visiting it every month, and I would kind of tell people, look, I can market my books on this site. No one really cared. I wasn't getting any real bites, and I found out pretty quickly I had to take the same routes that everyone else had to take, which was that I had to get an agent, which would take 6 months to a year if I got one at all, and then that agent would take however long to possibly get me a contract. As it happened, my website back then, like I said, it was called puckermob.com. We had an office in Manhattan, and my office was on the 7th floor of the Prince Building, and right across the hall was Scholastic, and one of Scholastic's offices. And we were always told that the Scholastic offices that were across the hall from us were the technology offices. But you ride the elevator for a couple of years with these people, and you realize there's a lot of older ladies who seem to be working in technology in this company. And you start realizing they're not really doing technology there. They just don't want you to know that that's where the acquisitions editors are sitting. So one day I just took my manuscript and I walked across the hall and I knocked on the door and I found a college kid who was there as an intern. And I said, listen, I need to speak to an acquisitions editor. And she looked at me with these kind of big deer eyes and she goes, well, there aren't any. I guess there are. Just please find me one. And she introduced me to one, and I sat and we chatted for a bit. We recognized each other in the hallways and in the elevators. Long story short, I ended up getting a contract with Scholastic. that at the last minute I decided not to pursue. And I did the math in my head, and I realized I could do a lot better, as awesome as a publisher as they are, and they could get me, out there very, very quickly. Mathematically, it made a lot more sense for me financially to do this on my own. I know the marketing. I know how the publishing industry works. I understand the books need to be printed in China and shipped back to the US. I could do some research to figure out how Amazon worked. Maybe I wouldn't get them into Barnes & Noble and Target and all that right off the bat, but I could sell them on Amazon, and that's the largest platform. So I realized I could do, would I rather be just the author, or do I want to be the publisher as well? That's who makes the money.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting, because it's a big debate, I know, amongst writers, especially someone starting off, whether to self-publish or to pursue traditional publishing. And there are definitely a lot of pros and cons to both. With traditional publishing, it's gonna take a while, even if you get an agent like that. Then they have to sell the book to a publisher. And even once a publisher buys it, it can take still 2 years or more for it to be actually produced into a book. Whereas, how fast, if you have the book written and illustrated, how fast are you able to get to shelves by self?
That's the thing, man. Everything you're saying is exactly correct. And you're waiting all those years for a minimal amount of money. They're going to give you a $4,000 or $5,000 advance against future royalties, and your future royalty is going to be, let's say, 5% of their wholesale price, which means you gotta sell about 10,000 books before you pay back that advance. And most traditionally published books don't sell more than 3,000 units. So you're walking away with maybe $4,000 or $5,000 for all of that work and all of that waiting. A traditional publisher will give almost 18 months to an illustrator to finish the book, and then plus after that they still have to then sell it, print it. So it's a years long process. Whereas for me, my illustrators finish a book in 3 to 6 months. I get the files together relatively quickly. I send them out to the printer. I get a book done in less than a year, and I can do multiple books that way. So but when someone asks me, how do I publish a book? I'll see people on Facebook in one of these groups, and they'll put up a general post saying, I'd like to publish a children's book. What do I do? And I'll see 50 to 100 people all replying and leaving one ridiculous comment after another, and no one has bothered to ask, what are your goals? Because depending on your goals are going to basically decide for you what direction you want to take. If you want to see your book on a shelf, let's say you're just strictly going for ego, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't say ego in a negative way. Let's say that you just want to see your books on the shelves of a Barnes & Noble and Target. You want to fly across the country and see your books on the shelves there also. That's really cool. I get that. That's a lot of fun. Well, your best bet for that is traditional publishing. Getting a traditional publisher. It might take you years, but that's your best bet for that goal. If your goal is to only have a few copies to give out to friends and family, because you want to be able to say that you published a book and have that notch, in your belt, then great. Then that's also a good goal. Your best bet is print on demand. Print out a few copies of a book at a relatively cheap price. Don't worry about the money making aspect of it, and you're good to go. If you want to make some money from your book, if you want to actually make substantial profits, and you want to turn it into a business, then the only real way to do that is by becoming a self-publisher and by printing your books in bulk in China, having them shipped back to the US, and creating your own sales channels.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And you're absolutely right, because that's the first thing that people have to tell themselves is what is their goal? And I think it's a lot of things that people aren't honest with themselves about. And also, unfortunately, like, again, I'm in some of these groups too, and I think a lot of it is, again, not in a negative way, but it is ego. They really do just want to say they want to walk in the mall and see it there in a window or something, and that's just so rare. It's better to have a more fiscally smart goal, perhaps, than that. Wow. Yeah. So I guess if you were gonna strongman the idea of traditional publishing, what would you say are the benefits of traditional publishing?
Well, I think there's a lot of benefits. One of the benefits is that you're going to have a faster track to getting your books on the shelves. If that's what you want, and then if your books are on the shelves at a Barnes & Noble or a Target or wherever else, and they start to sell, once you have that first one in, your second one or third one should be relatively easy to get in as well, which means maybe you fast track your way into, that Netflix series that you have been daydreaming about, your book becoming. That's also going to be relatively rare, and you're talking about years down the road, but it's a lot faster of a way to get there than through doing it the self-published way. You also don't have to take any money out of your pocket. Yes, you might have to wait a long time. You might have to accept the fact that you're not going to make any real money through traditional publishing. I mean, a few authors do, but most of the time that's not really the way that works. But you don't have to put money out for printing. You don't have to put money out for your illustrator. The traditional publisher does all of that, so it doesn't cost you anything. In fact, you get paid a little bit.
Yeah, one thing I think that scares people off from the self-publishing is, I think a lot of writers see themselves more almost as an artist. They just want to focus on the writing. They don't want to run a business. They don't want to make orders. They don't want to do sales. What would you say to those people?
If you're not interested in creating in building a substantial profit for yourself, then don't worry about the business part of it. Then go the traditional route. Make that into your goal. Try to do whatever you can to get an agent, and hopefully that agent will be able to sell your manuscript to a publisher, and go that direction. Business is not for everybody, but it's not. It doesn't make sense to say that I want to make a substantial profit from writing, but I don't want to do the business part of it. That's like saying I want to be able to have the freedom of driving. I just don't want to get my license. Well, you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, that's so true. But I guess from the artist perspective, they say is like every time I'm working on marketing my book, or every time I'm working on selling my book, that's less time I have to write, which is why they probably got into it. I think most authors perhaps don't get into writing to look at analytics on sales and stuff, right? So again, is there any other advice you say to that specifically, or just again, it's kind of what your answer was before? Know why you get into it, right?
You're right, exactly. And a lot of authors go into it because they, for whatever reason, they have a story they want to tell, and they feel like that story is vitally important, and the rest of the world is going to need to read it. But again, if you want the rest of the world to read it, you're going to also have to get into the marketing and the sales of it. No one's going to read it just because you write something. You need to actually promote it. I do see a lot of authors who will hang their hat on the fact they've written 10, 12, 20 books, although no one's ever read any of them because they don't do any of the marketing around it. Yeah. Which is if you just want to go through the exercise of writing, then great, then that's fine. But you can't do that and then be surprised that you're not making any money from it because you haven't done any of the sales. You have to learn that. You have to learn that to love the sales aspect of it, or give up on that particular dream. When I got into marketing years ago because I love marketing. I love creating new ideas. I loved, the idea of taking a product and figuring out how to sell it and how to brand something. I didn't realize that the creative part of it was maybe 10% of my job, and the other 90% of my job was running a business and working with numbers. And I didn't love numbers back then. I had to learn to love numbers. I had to learn to love the business side of it because the creative aspect, it was a very small percentage. A lot of the designers that I would hire quickly realized that they got into advertising design in order to do creative stuff, but the creative aspect of it was only 10, 15% of their job. The rest of it was editing and production, which kind of sucks. It's not always a lot of fun. You have to learn how to love that part of it also. It's interesting because I go back to, I hear people talking, and I go back to my own thoughts about college. I was an economics major, and I had to take science classes and math classes and other classes that really didn't apply to economics, right? Music classes. And, I would think to myself, why am I taking music class? I've already declared myself as an economics major. Why am I taking a class in astronomy or in music and whatever else? And I hear a lot of kids in college also complaining about the same thing, about all of these, requirements they have to take that are outside of their major. And now I understand it. Now the answer is because college is preparing you for what the reality of your career is going to be. Your career, whatever your chosen career is going to be about 10, 15% of the things that you actually like, and 85% of things that just kind of go along with it, but that you don't enjoy so much. Yeah. You have to do the things you don't enjoy. No one gets to do just the stuff they love. Yeah, that's true in any medium or any business whatsoever. The more well-rounded you are, the more successful you'll potentially be able to be. But I'm just out of curiosity, are you a member of the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators? I'm not. When I first started writing books, I was asking a lot of questions and I was doing a lot of research, and I found that a lot of people were telling me that that's really where you have to start. You got to start with being part of SCBWI, and so I joined, and I paid my $120 in dues for the year, and I went to a couple of meetings and a couple of seminars, and I really didn't get it. I didn't see what the value was. The seminars I went to didn't really teach me so much as just seemed to be a platform for whatever author was there to promote his or her own books. The meetups were with other people, typically who also hadn't had any success yet with publishing. So, I didn't really get any value out of it. So I haven't joined in like the last 2 years or so. Not to say there's not value for it. I think there's enough value in it if you want to put the effort into it. I just didn't. I didn't see any value for me.
I think it kind of goes back to what you said before, but applying it to this about like why you would go and what you would get out of it. Like for me personally, I am a member and I've gone to the conferences and I really do enjoy them. And even though I do learn a lot while I'm there, I think a reason that I really enjoy going to the conferences is to kind of help keep myself accountable to keep writing and meeting authors and just learning different techniques. But one thing I do know about going to them, and this is definitely a generalization and just kind of what I saw in some of the people that I talked to. It's not a representation of the organization by any means, but I've noticed that some authors I've met there's kind of a stigma about self-published authors or about the process of self-publishing, I should say. To the point is they also recommend people generally, some other authors, that it's better to not self-publish if you ever plan to be traditionally published, because that is a knock against you. They're going to be less interested for that reason. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't really know if that's necessarily true. I'm not in the minds of the of traditional publishers, and I don't know if they would see it that way. So I really can't speak to that. I know that a lot of people. I know that a lot of people who are not indie publishers believe that indie publishing is only for people who don't have the opportunity to get a traditionally published contract. If you think of traditionally published contracts as the cream of the crop, and those are the best of the best. And everyone else who can't get that, well, they publish their books in some other way. And in some ways, they're correct. I mean, 90% of the books that I look at that people send to me are trash. I mean, they're not very good. This is fortunately or unfortunately, it's an industry with virtually no barriers to entry. Somebody has an idea for a book, and all they need to do is jot down a story on a piece of paper, and suddenly they are an author. As opposed to, let's say that I wake up tomorrow and I've got an idea for an internet connected toaster. Well, it might be a great idea, but I'm not going to start that business tomorrow. I need to first, create some plans and get the electricity part of it figured out, and the engineering, and I got to find someone to manufacture it. I need to raise the money for all that. I can't just jump into the toaster manufacturing industry. Book writing, you can. Anybody can write a book, and so because anybody can, anybody does, and therefore you see a large percentage of the books that come out not really being ready for prime time. So I understand why people think that indie publishers are less than, but there are indie publishers who I think really do rise to the top. They do have the talent and the ability to be traditionally published. They choose not to because they also recognize the business side of it is if I do it on my own, I could be I can make a lot more money. Now I've had businesses before that were not publishing businesses that I've sold to other companies. My before I did this, I had a website that got 10, 12 million people per month, and I sold that off to another company. The same way here, my publishing company, which now has 5 books published underneath it, 3 more coming out this year, 3 more coming out next year, and continuing to grow. At some point, I'm not really looking for a buyer, but is it likely that someone, a large traditional publisher will come to me and say, we'd like to buy your publishing company? Yeah, that would probably happen. Whether or not I'd be interested in that, I don't know. But there is a good likelihood that as long as I continue to have success, someone will want to buy my catalog of books in my company.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Just to go back to, about the self-publishing and the quality of it, I think that's another benefit that the traditional publishing has is if you can get through, you have more eyes in it. So there is a little bit more quality control. That being said, because I've seen a lot of those frightening self-published books that you're kind of talking about. And what is your process for that quality control to make sure that it's okay? Because I think one thing that a lot of authors do is they make this book and they make excuses to themselves. If someone gives them advice on it, say, hey, this doesn't look great, or you might want to rephrase this, they say, oh, that person just doesn't get it. Like it's right in my head, which is also kind of the kiss of death because, those are same thoughts that someone buying it might think too,
Correct.
Yeah. So what is your process for quality control in your books?
Well, I have a lot of books in my daughter's library that I read to her on a regular basis. The book that I bought at Barnes & Noble and wherever else. that, and these, because they are traditionally published, and you can count on Disney and Random House and Scholastic and all them to, promote and print, really high quality books. If that is the top level, I don't want to put out a book that's going to be anything other than on the same level as those books. Because if I am, what's the point? If I'm going to have the same price tag, why would somebody buy my book as opposed to one of those books if it's not going to be in that same league? And that means not only the writing, but the illustration, the quality of the production, the printing and the paper quality and the hardcover quality and all that. So, I make sure that I'm working with the best of the best on all fronts. So I do have people that I trust that I give my manuscript to, who can give me feedback and tell me what's good and what's not. And sometimes I listen to them. Sometimes I say, what, thank you, but I kind of don't really agree with what you're saying, and I'm going to continue doing what I want to do. The same thing with illustrations. I only work with illustrators who are in demand. Even if I have to wait a few months for them to get some time in their schedule to work on my books, I don't want to work with illustrators that are of poor quality. And I see that very often. I see a lot of people will say to me, I want to get my book out there. I don't have a big budget. So do you know any illustrators that are willing to work on the cheap? And, the illustrators that they're looking at are just not professional illustrators, not illustrators that are ready for prime time. And I know I hate when people say that art is subjective. Art is subjective to a degree, but there's some art that gets into a museum and some art that doesn't. There's some art that gets sold and some art that doesn't. And the art that doesn't for a reason, because it's not going to appeal to people en masse. And my response is, don't publish. Just because you want to doesn't mean that you should.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't have the money for that right now, then save your pennies for the next year or two. Do a Kickstarter campaign. Learn how to get a couple of small investors. You can raise $10,000, $20,000 relatively easily with if you focus on that, and use that money to get a good illustrator, someone who's really high quality. Use that money to print up your books with an offset printer that is reliable, that has a history and a background of success, that can do your books on really high quality paper, that's going to bind it the right way. You need to be, if you want to actually be thought of in that realm, you need to produce books that are of that quality.
Yeah, no, that's so important, and especially because I see a lot of people just looking for a cheap illustrator, and like you're saying. But the thing is about it, like if you look at the book, the writer gets a lot of credit, but to the kids' eyes, I mean, like the illustrations are what drive the story, and not only do they drive the story, but they support each other so much that, like, again, it's really something you don't want to skimp out on. And like you said yourself, it is subjective, but there is still a quality control within that, and basics as far as composition on a page. Which actually brings me to another really quick question, just to get back to your books too. Is I notice the graphic design layout. So aside from the illustrations, just the way that you lay out text, and specifically with Ricky the Rock, and it looks like you have some similar techniques here in Tessa the Tin. The way that you have the bigger lettering and the way it's laid out, is that something that you decide, or is it back and forth with you and the illustrator, or do you have another whole person do that?
No, actually, so I have the illustrator do all the interior work for the illustrations, but I typically like to do my own typography. I'm not really sure why. I just kind of enjoy it, and I have an idea of the way I want the fonts to look. So I make sure the illustrator gives me some space to put the typography. I don't ever like to put copy over an image and just have, like, a faded out part of that image. I always think that kind of looks a little chintzy. So they always make sure they leave me some blank space. But I like to have. I think that the text should be a part of the story. I think you need to find a font that's easy to read, but still is a little bit of fun. It has a little bit of a personality. Depending on the kind of book, you can really kind of weave that into the overall artwork. One of the books that I have that's my favorite of the ones that I've written is The Bear and the Fern. Now that's a quieter story. It's a little bit of a sadder kind of a story, and so I didn't need to do that one. Thank you. I didn't need to do a lot with the typography on the inside. I needed it to be more of a quiet sort of a font, more of a serious font. With Ricky, that's more of a boisterous, fun, exciting sort of a story. So I have, where you mentioned that, the copy is, different sizes and whatever else. I have one font for the narrative, and I have a different font altogether for the dialogue. And that font changes in size to indicate how loud someone's speaking. So I'm able to kind of adjust the volume of the characters based on the size of the font, and I think that really has helped to make that story kind of like beloved by a lot of people, because it has taken the copy and interwoven it into the illustrations.
That's really interesting. Yeah, yeah. No, first of all, I think it does have that effect. So just to backtrack on to what you were saying, so you have your illustrator do the full illustrations, and then you fit in the typography around. You said they leave you space, but you don't have it necessarily pre-planned exactly where you're going to put it.
Correct. And a lot of times I'll have to go back to the illustrator and say, hey, listen, I've got a little more copy on this page than you might have realized. I need some more space. And they'll go back in and they'll adjust things and give me some more space.
Wow, that's really worked out well for you, because I really like the way the typography is laid out, particularly in this series, the Rocks series. So, yeah, what is that whole series? Oh, the You Rock group. That series is cool. Yeah, that's really great. Another thing I just want to get into a little bit too is your process. That actually, your the New Page Press. So I'm sure that came up as a matter of necessity, because you maybe couldn't find the right type of self-publishing venue that worked for you. So that's why you created your own. Because one thing I'll say too is that these are really high. When I ordered this, I was a little not to take this the wrong way, but I was surprised at how really nice this paper is and everything. I mean, this is really, really nice. So how much of that was exploring and testing, and what was that process like in order to create a quality book too?
Well, I think there's a fallacy in thinking that you need to have a self-publishing venue. And I think a lot of people look for that, and what they end up when they start going down that road, they end up with a vanity press, someone like a Mascot Publishing or a Zillibris or something like that, which these are companies that say that they are publishing your book, but really what they are, they're publishing services. They're not actually publishing your book in the way a traditional publisher would, and they are charging you a lot for it. And ultimately, it's very, very hard to get your money back in with those sort of places. So when I kind of realized that, and I realized that fairly quickly, and I saw that an Ingram Spark is not going to be able to publish my book print my book for anywhere near the cost that I would need in order to make some money. You start recognizing that you start looking through the industry a little more honestly, and you look at it with an open mind, and you realize, printing is done in China. That's where that's where good publishing is done. And I did some research to really vet out the printing that I want to do, and I realized that if I'm going to be a publishing company, I don't want to be published by I don't want to leave a Scholastic to go with a Mascot, which is basically just going to be taking my money under the guise of publishing it and then not really publishing it. I have to become my own publishing company, and I've always been an entrepreneur. I mentioned before I have a marketing company, I had a media company, so I've never been afraid to open up an LLC. So I opened up an LLC called New Page Press, Page being Paige, and that's my daughter's middle name. So that's kind of where that came from. And there you go, thank you. And that's my publishing company. And right now, my publishing company only publishes books that I write. One day, I will hopefully be publishing books that other people write. Could I do that right now? I technically could, but it wouldn't really be fair to authors, because I don't have the distribution right now outside of Amazon. I do have, some books in Target. I've got some books that Barnes & Noble is starting to test my books in some of their better stores. But until I know that I have a very easy distribution system, I don't think it's right to take on other authors. So maybe one day in the future I will.
See, I must have been confused. I thought you did do it for other authors, but you do offer some sort of service in printing books for other authors, don't you? Or
correct. So not through my publishing company. But my publishing company is only for my books. I have another company called the IAPC, the Independent Authors Publishing Collective, and that company, with the success of Ricky and my other books, I've had a lot of other authors come to me and they've asked me, how do I kind of replicate that kind of success? Because I'm not doing anything that's magical. I'm not doing anything that anyone else can do, as long as you follow the right path. But you start to tell someone about printing in China, and suddenly you can see their eyes kind of glaze over, and it scares them. It scares them to print with a printing company that A, doesn't really speak English as their first language, that B, is going to be speaking to you about printing on an expert level. They don't want to teach you about printing. They want you to already know it. That C, is working when you're sleeping and vice versa. And then on top of that, have to deal with the complexities of international shipping. And a lot of them will say, I can't deal with all that. I'm just going to print off of an Ingram Spark, or I'll print with a US printer, or I'll print through Amazon KDP. And that's not the right avenue for building a business. So I recognized, okay, the best way to help everyone out is if I just kind of acted as an intermediary. So there's other companies that do that, Print Ninja, for example. But I looked at their prices and I realized their markups are typically so high. We don't need to charge that much. We can charge a very little bit on top of the printer, pass most of the profit back onto the author, and let them make as much of a profit as physically possible without having to actually work through the printer themselves. So we worked with probably 40, 50 authors by now. We've probably printed 500,000 books over the last year and a half. We're working with 11 different authors right now at this moment, which is probably the highest number we've ever worked with at one time. And I think it's typically gone really, really well. We handle the printing and we handle the shipping.
What's the name of that website again?
It's the company is called IAPC, and it's iapcbooks.com.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, people definitely check that out. I didn't put that in the show notes. I didn't notice that one right away, so I'll make sure I put that in the show notes for people to find after, because that's a awesome resource that you've created for people. Because as soon as you started saying those things, my eyes started glazing over too, because that's very intimidating. Again, it's kind of harks back to what I was saying earlier about again, that's not why they got into writing. That's not why they enjoy writing, to be doing those types of deals. So that's awesome that you make that available for people. That's really great. And so on your website for that, is there different packages for people based on the amount of books and the size and whatnot?
No, not so much packages. There's actually an online calculator. So you can go into the website and you can just put in whether it's hardcover or softcover. Do you want how many pages, color, black and white, dust cover, yes or no? There's a whole bunch of different variables. You put in all the variables that you want, the quantity that you're looking for, and it spits out a price to you for printing and for shipping. And the shipping is back to our warehouse. We also will do the warehousing for you if you want that sort of thing. So we've got a warehouse in Kearney, New Jersey. So you don't want 3,000 books sitting in your room, in your basement, whatever. We'll take care of them. Warehousing fees aren't really very high. Even if it's just 1,000 books. A lot of people will just keep the books themselves, but we typically tell them, the warehousing costs are not what's really going to put you over the top in terms of not being able to afford anything. And if you're going to keep your books in your basement and they're going to be there for a while where it's going to be humid or damp or whatever else, that's going to possibly harm the pages of your book. I mean, this is paper. This is not solid material. Paper is going to not do well in different temperatures. So the warehouse that we have is very temperature controlled. It's humidity controlled. Let us hold on to it for you. We'll do the distribution for you as you get orders. But it's there as a service. If people want it.
So what is that process like for getting the books to Amazon? Because I know you're not exclusive through Amazon, but it seems like that's a big place where you do. Well, I mean, that's where almost everything is sold now. But it seems like a really big vendor for you.
So Amazon is a big vendor for us, and right now, my books are being distributed through a company called APG, which is a company that also distributes for Compendium, which it has some New York Times best-selling books and a bunch of others as well. And they're responsible for taking my books and getting them out into meeting the buyers of Barnes and Noble and Target and Costco and all that, and they're starting to make those inroads. So Amazon used to be kind of like my entire universe, and now I've pulled back a bit, and I'm recognizing for Amazon for what it is a major part of the solar system, but not the entire universe. And in that same solar system, while it might be Jupiter, but there's other planets in that solar system as well that are also important. So Amazon is something I pay attention to, but I pay attention to a lot of other things now. But that took a while. But in order to get there, in order to get a distributor who does those sales, I need to have a history of sales first, which is why my focus was on Amazon for a lot of years.
Yeah, that's right. It's a good barrier to entry for getting sales, as well as, like you said, it probably is the Jupiter of the solar system of selling books. Yeah, I love that. But what about actually, because like you said, let's say you ordered 3,000 books. You can't send Amazon 3,000 books to sell out. You don't ship them individually either, right? The book?
No, so Amazon they've got different platforms. When I first started with Amazon, they had a platform called Amazon Advantage, which is strictly for content creators. Now, over the last year, Amazon Advantage has been closed down to new people who want to join it. However, I've been hearing rumblings lately that people have been actually able to get onto Amazon Advantage. And it's a great platform for people who can get on. Now, as I'm hearing that more people are starting to get on it again, I'm hopeful that it will open up for new authors again. If you can't get on there are other platforms such as Amazon Seller Central, where you are basically running your own little store on Amazon. And at that point, you might be having to send them out to individuals yourself, or use what's called FBA, Fulfillment by Amazon. But there's a lot of different ways to use Amazon. But Amazon, I think, in retail is only one fork in a three-pronged road. If you order 3,000 books, again, this is assuming that coronavirus lockdowns are not going to be a thing forever. You also want to be looking at street fairs, where you can sell your books for 15, 16 bucks, even though you're printing them for, a few dollars. You want to be looking at school visits. School visits can be insanely lucrative. You're looking at pre-sales of books at the full cover price, plus money for just appearing at the school. And come September, we might not be able to go back and do, because of the virus, might not be able to go back and do live visits yet, but you'll be able to do Zoom visits to entire classrooms. And at that point, we'll be able to charge for them again. So that actually can be a very lucrative way of doing it. You order 3,000 books, you don't have to only think about retail, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whatever else. There's other venues as well.
Yeah, one in looking through your postings and stuff, I noticed this image here where it says Amazon is out of stock, but there's still other opportunities to buy it. Now, how does that happen when Amazon runs out? Can it run out suddenly? Like, how close do you have to watch Amazon to make sure you're able to fulfill orders?
Well, that was actually my fault. One of the areas where I'm not necessarily always good with my own books is inventory management. So, as you get close, that was probably done during the holidays. And as you get closer to the holidays, Amazon lets you know that, if you're going to send them books closer to December, they're most likely going to be sitting on a loading dock somewhere for 2 weeks before they're put into the system, because they just have such a big influx of gifts and things coming in to put into their inventory that if you send it to them too late, it's not going to make it into their inventory in time. So that was my fault. I probably should have seen that I didn't have a lot of inventory at Amazon at the time, and I should have sent them books earlier. I didn't. So once I realized that was going to happen, I kind of shifted gears and said, okay, Amazon has them. They just haven't put them in their system yet. Until that happens, let me at least try to sell some of these books off of my own website.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Another thing, a couple other ones I saw here that just made me have questions here was this one about having books on sale, and also that you occasionally do like free digital downloads. What's your thinking behind making those types of choices?
So I don't love KDP, which is Kindle Direct Publishing, ebooks and paperback versions through Amazon, as a general rule. However, one of the nice things about doing an ebook through Amazon is that Amazon will allow you to create an ebook and give it away for 5 days, up to 5 days, for free. And the idea there being that you give away your book for free for a few days, and the hope is that if people like it, they're going to leave you some positive reviews. It's an easy way to get early reviews for your books, because the more reviews you get, the greater likelihood is that people will see those reviews and buy books based off of the good ones. And B, as you get more reviews, Amazon gives you more visibility. So, I typically will put my book up as an e-version to get some early reviews using those 5 days. And then once those 5 days are used up, I unpublish my book because I really don't want to have ebook versions, out there.
Yeah, that makes that's really interesting. So you use it as a tactic to help drive
reviews,
promotion and more views. Okay, so tying into that a little bit, like, how do you use social media? How does that fit into you as an author and even as a publisher?
I don't probably use it as much as I probably should. I'm not as into Instagram as I probably should be. Instagram, I think, is an amazing resource that, for whatever reason, maybe it's my age, I just haven't really gotten into it yet. I am probably sure that TikTok is going to be a large platform for people. I can't get into it again. Maybe it's my age and my inability or unwillingness to adapt to things like that. I do use Facebook quite a bit. I mean, I have a group on Facebook for authors. That's 24,000 people, somewhere around there. I'm very active. There you go, 23,000 people. I'm very active on my own page on Facebook. I'm starting to do a lot more with email blasts. I've got 5,000-6,000 teachers, if not more, in an email list. So I'm starting to send them some things more regularly. But I think more I can't stand Twitter as a general rule. For whatever reasons. I think social media probably would be an important player for me. And it is with the venues that I'm choosing to use. I just haven't really expanded or broadened my horizons beyond that. Although I do use a lot of pay-per-click advertising, particularly on Amazon.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, yeah. That group, again, just for people on audio, it's the Children's Book Authors and Illustrators Publishing, Marketing, and Selling. It's a private group on Facebook, and Jay does a lot of communication there and gives a lot of awesome advice. It's not uncommon to see an hour-long live stream of him just giving all this amazing advice to people who are self-publishing specifically for their book. So definitely check that out. But before we start to wrap up, one thing I do want to point people to and give you an opportunity to talk about is I see that you do a lot of webinars, which is another resource for people to learn more about this process. Do you mind talking a little bit about that and what those kind of look like?
Yeah, I think I probably do like 1 or 2 a week, and they're on a variety of different topics. Some of them are more popular than others. One of the more popular ones is just understanding the landscape. I spend a lot of time when I made the switch over from working with the traditional publishers to deciding to do indie publishing. I did a lot of research. I didn't want to get into something without first knowing what I was getting into, what this industry is really like, how it actually really works. And a lot of people don't really want to do that kind of research. I mean, I spent months reading through, current and back issues of Publishers Weekly and Nielsen reports and whatever I can get my hands on, really. And not, I think for a lot of people, their research comes down to going into a Facebook group and saying, how do I publish my book? And then you're going to be getting a lot of comments from people who really have no idea how to publish a book. So I decided to start doing webinars as a way to kind of wrap it all up and say, okay, here's going to be a webinar on understanding the publishing landscape. Here's a webinar on how to understand how Amazon works. Here's one on how to write and rhyme and understand how to get proper meter, things like that. So, maybe once, twice a week, I'll do different webinars. And I try to keep the price low. Usually it's $15, $20. And for that $20, you're getting, months worth of education crammed into an hour. And I've seen my webinars go from an hour to 2 hours as people have a ton of questions. I've got no reason to cut it short. I'll sit around for however long answering as many questions as people have.
That's awesome. So just to get a little more specific in that, what does a webinar kind of look like?
So when people, it's typically done on Zoom, and I have a PowerPoint presentation that I sort of lightly follow, although I tend to kind of go off on tangents and wax poetic about things that I feel passionate about. I get through the topics, and I'm not one. I teach some classes at Pratt Institute, and one of the very first things that I tell the students there is I don't teach generalities. I don't want anything to be vague. I teach very kind of hands-on. Here's what you need to know, and here's how to do things. I don't want anyone to leave my class or one of my webinars saying, that was great, I just don't know what to do next. I don't know what to do first. I want people to walk out saying, I've got so many ideas, I want to get them all started now. I want them to be able to get their hands dirty immediately and be able to take what I'm doing and apply it to actually creating a real business. All of my teachings are all about how to create a business from publishing. Because again, if I could do this, and this is my full-time job now. I'm, writing and publishing and marketing my books. This is my full-time job. If I could do this, really anybody can, as long as you take the time to understand what it is you're getting into and do it the right way.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. Yeah. And you said those are about once a week. Yeah, I see them posted all the time. That's such a great opportunity for people to have. Now, how many people do you typically have in that? Is there a lot of one-on-one time that people have in it?
So I make as much time as people want towards the end. A lot of people are not necessarily from the U.S., so they can't always make it for the time that I'm doing it. I typically do them at 9 o'clock at night Eastern time, which means that people in California at 6 o'clock, they might be having dinner with their kids. But I typically see, for a popular topic, I'll see between 50 and 70 people who sign up, and maybe 20 or 30 of them will actually be there live. The rest of them will just look for a link to the replay afterwards. But I have anybody who signs up, they get to watch it live. I send everyone a replay link so they can watch it again later on, if they or for the first time within 48 hours. Or if people don't really want to spend the $20, a month after I do it, I put up my Patreon page. And on Patreon, it stays up there for a month. It shows up a month later. You have to wait a little bit. Once it's up, then you have a month to watch it.
Wow, that's really cool. I didn't realize you had the Patreon as well. Is there a website? I'll make sure to put that in the links below, but do you mind just telling us what that's called so people can search it?
Yeah, so it's actually patreon.com/Mr. J Author.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. And speaking of which, I just wanted to, as we're wrapping up here, I wanted to bring up your website, which is meetmrj.com. And there people can find, it's a good way for people to connect with you, whether they want virtual school visits or in-person ones once that opens up. And I'm sure there's a good way to get connected with you for pretty much any of these things that we've talked about. Is there, oh, actually, one mini question I have for you too. Cause I noticed in your books, it's not your full name. You go by just Mr. J rather than your first and last name on your books. What was your thinking behind that?
Well, the first print ones all had my full name, Jay Miletsky, on them. And then I would go to these school visits, and I kind of found out pretty quickly, not that this is the first time it's happened. This has happened my entire life. Nobody can really pronounce my last name. I mean, my name is Miletsky, but I've heard everything from Miletsky to I mean, you can't imagine how many different ways there are to butcher my last name.
I can imagine. My last name's Krutinger, but
right, yeah. So you're with me on that.
Yeah.
So if a kid is going to go home and tell their parents they want to buy, they saw Jay Miletsky, they're not going to be able to find me on Amazon anywhere. And these kids ended up calling me Mr. J anyway. I mean, I had even a lot of teachers who would introduce me as Mr. J. And I started realizing if that's the way they're introducing me and that's what kids are calling me, why not just go by that? So I actually applied for a trademark. I have a trademark on the Mr. J name. And I'm just starting to go by that. And that will hopefully keep my name in kids' minds a little bit longer.
Wow, that's really interesting, because I think it kind of goes back to something that you were mentioning before about why you're getting into it, because that ties back into that kind way of mentioning ego. Whereas again, I think a lot of people like seeing their name on the book and that book in the store, which again just kind of ties into your motivation for all this and the message behind your books, and that it's a huge success for you. And I think this is the beginning, really. Even though you've come so far, I think this is really the beginning. And I think I'm really excited to see where this all goes. And I'm sure the rest of the audience will too. For those of you who are watching with us, Jay's social media has been scrolling at the bottom there the whole time. You can find him on Instagram at Mr. J, and make sure you check out his Patreon and his website. And his website is www.meetmrj.com. Jay, thank you again so much for coming on the show. And everyone,
my pleasure.
Make sure you check out his work. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.